India is a country of 1.3 billion people, an emerging economic power, a nuclear power, a country of temples and art treasures, the Taj Mahal, and Bollywood. There are massively rich people. However, most of its vast population lives with dire poverty, poorly nourished, without adequate housing, safe water, or sanitation. It lacks infrastructure. In 2009, at a Christian Medical College consultation in Vellore, Dilip Mukherjee, at the time Director of Christian Aid in Britain, gave us these figures. 800 million people lived on less than £1 a day. 250 million people were socially excluded by caste or because they were tribals. 2.2 million children died every year. 200 million people were malnourished, more than in any other country in the world. There were 44 million wasted children. Nearly half those under 3 were underweight. More than 50 million children would never go to school. But now a little about the city itself. Vellore is in the south of India, between Chennai and Bangalore. The population of the district is about 1.6 million, and the city itself is one of the hottest in Tamil Nadu. It is surrounded by bare volcanic hills in a sort of craggy basin. As the sun shines on the Rocky Mountains, they hold the heat. It can feel like an oven, with temperatures soaring into the high 40s. However varied our perspectives of India may be, they're each likely to hold truth. India presents us with a kaleidoscope of experience. It's more like a whole world in itself, and it is ever-changing. Our call had been a clear one. At a time of significant change in our lives, when we were seeking God's direction, we met Dilip Mukherjee, who pointed us to CMC. He had been a doctor there for 17 years before working in Britain for Christian Aid. Learning that Geoff was a medical doctor, specialising in diabetes, Dilip said, "I know where you are needed. You must go to the Christian Medical College Hospital in Vellore." Professor Nihal Thomas, head of diabetes at CMC, had begun a new venture, training doctors, nurses and chiropodists from 100 mission hospitals in diabetes. This was similar to the work Geoff was doing in Cambridge, and we heard it as call. We made a 3-week visit to test this and followed it with a 6-month stint, repeated visits, and 15 privileged years of involvement followed. The hospital began 120 years ago with a young woman, Ida Scudder, whose story I'd like to share with you now. Ida Scudder was the daughter of a medical missionary who spent her early years in Ranipet near Vellore. It was at a time when famine struck South India. She was traumatized by the starving children she saw and vowed that when she grew up, she would leave Vellore and never return. At 20, she was a student in Massachusetts in the United States. During that time, her mother became seriously ill, and Ida had to return to India to be with her. She remained for 4 years, teaching in a school. I have a tape recording of Ida describing the turning point in her life. One evening, there were 3 separate visits to her parents' home, all from young men desperately seeking medical attention for their wives struggling in labour. The first was a Brahmin priest. Ida explained to him that she had no medical experience. It was her father who was the doctor. The Brahmin replied that his wife was in Purdah. She had never seen a man from outside the family since their marriage. 2 other calls were made that night, each with the same request. One by a Muslim man and the other by the father of one of Ida's pupils. For the same reason, neither could accept help from Ida's father. Sadly, early next morning, Ida heard the sound of drums and wailing mourners. The 3 women had died because custom dictated that no man could attend them in labour. This was a wake-up call for Ida to study medicine and return to India. She went back to America, trained as a doctor. She returned to India in 1899 to serve people living with poverty and disease. This was to be a lifelong vocation. Ida determined to set up a 2-bed unit to train India's first women doctors in obstetrics. From this small seed, there's grown a vast teaching hospital with 2,800 beds and 162 operations performed each day. Every year, 19,000 babies are born here, and there are 2.5 million outpatient consultations carried out. Since Indian people attend with their whole families, this could mean 20,000 people visit the outpatient department every day. This is one of the hospital gates, opening onto Ida Scudder Road. People with appalling deformities are seen begging on the pavements. CMC is now one of the leading teaching hospitals in India. People come because of its trusted reputation for expertise, unparalleled care, and honesty. It offers high-tech medicine such as heart surgery and transplantation to people from all over India and abroad. The profits from these services pay for the hospital's work amongst those living with poverty. Nearly half the patients receive a financial concession, and many are treated free. The hospital was recently acclaimed as one of the most socially responsible institutions in India. CMC Main Hospital dominates the skyline of the city. Nearby are the Shell Eye Hospital, the low-cost effective care unit on the edge of the Old Town slum, the Family Medicine Clinic, and an outreach clinic for homeless. 15 miles away is the Rural Unit for Health and Social Affairs. Its role extends far beyond treating the sick, with much education and community development. 40,000 farmers have committed suicide in recent times because of poverty and crop failure. This is a tailoring class for young women, mostly the daughters of destitute farmers, learning skills to earn a livelihood. In Bagayam, where we lived, and near this temple, are the medical college campus with its auditorium, and chapel, near to which is CHAD, the Community Health and Development Hospital. And it was here that Geoff first worked as part of the diabetes training programme. In 2005, we went for 3 weeks to glean more information. With Professor Nihal Thomas, the head of diabetes, we travelled overnight to 3 mission hospitals to see how the early days of CMC's training programme had benefited them. Afterwards, the suggestion was made for Geoff to set up a clinic at CHAD to serve as an example of what a peripheral mission hospital might reasonably be able to provide. Diabetes is one of the most serious medical problems facing India. Up to 1 person in 4 in India develops type 2 diabetes. The metabolism of South Asian people is different from those in the West. In the West, it's usually older, overweight people who have type 2 diabetes. But in India, it can occur in people of normal weight and at a younger age. Lack of care adds to the risk of complications, heart disease, strokes, blindness, foot ulcers, and loss of limbs. A recent study in CMC of college students in Vellore suggested that more than 50% had pre-diabetes. We returned to Vellore at the end of 2005 for 6 months, arriving during the monsoon. Previously, we'd been in a guest house, but now we were fending for ourselves. We moved into a block of flats whilst the building was still under construction. Water and electricity supplies were unreliable. There were no curtains, so we were on view, and we had to kit out the flat with cooker, cutlery, cups, pans, bedding, etc. In the first few days, our biggest difficulty was in having no phone. And being new, we had to discover where to buy it and drinking water. We felt very privileged to have the flat and, of course, the security of the hospital and the many new friends who supplied us with blankets and household equipment. How we lived, though, was in stark contrast to our neighbours. We were unprepared for what confronted us, culturally shocked, challenged by the density of the crowds, the squalor, and the conditions people were living in. Outside the flat, the ground was heavy with mud and water from the monsoon. Sometimes we just had to wade through it. At night, a pack of wild dogs roamed, howling, biting and tearing at each other. Here are some of our nearest neighbours who lived with insecurity and often went short. We warmed to the people in this ragged shanty home. One night, the daughter gave birth to her third child. In the neighbouring shacks, small businesses operated. Busy family-run roadside cafes. This man, Adobe, takes in ironing. He came to our flat at Christmas. His father had died and he didn't have the equivalent of £12 for the funeral. Yet despite hardships, people have great respect for one another. They are courteous, kind, and impeccably clean. The saris are a riot of colour, and the scents of jasmine wafts from the flowers in the beautiful black hair of the women. Often they'd pin some in my hair too. Buses were crowded with men and women, separated on either side, and others crushed in the aisle. On more than one occasion, when I had to stand, my bag would be taken from me and safely nursed on the knee of a stranger until I got off. Local people surmised I was going to CMC, and sometimes I would find the 2 rupee fare paid for me, and I'd never know to whom I was indebted. Across the road from our flat at Bagayam was the Community Health and Development Hospital, Chad. This is on the edge of Vellore and serves an urban and rural population of 140,000. Geoff worked with the staff to develop the diabetes clinic, cautiously exploring opportunities, building relationships, and discussing the care of people with diabetes, the education, and the treatments given. Time was spent on the wards, in the outpatient department, and with the mobile clinics in rural villages. He spent time in the laboratory and the pharmacy, discussing investigations and exploring drugs availability and cost. A record booklet was designed and educational material produced for the patients. He provided a training course for all medical staff, which was later rerun in other units. We were happy to find that over the next 3 years, the clinic grew from 200 to 1,600 patients. The staff were well motivated. Care was organised and good records kept. The Department of Endocrinology at CMC produced a textbook on diabetes, which sold 20,000 copies and became available in Bangladesh, Pakistan and Thailand, as well as in India. Chad provides healthcare for the villagers through weekly mobile clinics. Here there is only one doctor for every 40,000 people. In past times, the barber's wife was the traditional village birth attendant. Perhaps historically, the barber was the only person with sharp instruments. Now, trained by Chad, women become part-time community health workers, links between the people and the hospital staff. This woman works in nursery care. A revealing experience is driving with the mobile clinic to the isolated communities in the Javadi Hills. Distance and lack of roads make it difficult for villagers to access medical care, especially in emergencies and in childbirth. Clinics take place at the side of the road. A home visit took us to a family with cholera. One must be prepared for the unexpected. One year, the tribal people were celebrating Pongal, the Tamil New Year festival. To great excitement and the beating of loud drums, the village gathered for a communal meal of hot sweet rice and coconut. We held back at first, not wanting to intrude. But to our delight, we were invited to join the feast. Mission hospital work is holistic and much broader than medical care. Chad's other projects include children's nurseries and elderly daycare. Also, self-help groups such as Share, which enable people to earn a living. 400 affiliated self-help groups have mushroomed here. This is Share's mission statement. This women's project has been running for about 30 years. Poorly educated women had initially to overcome great antagonism from their husbands, who felt threatened as their wives became increasingly skilled. Eventually, however, some men were drawn in. The women developed craft work with palm weaving and basketry, began learning English, developed business insights, and a few travelled. negotiating contracts with Western organisations like Body Shop and Oxfam. Chad's unsung care reaches many individuals. We visit a man who's lost his lower legs and most of his hands due to a congenital disorder. When very young, he and his twin brother, also with the disease, were put in an orphanage by their parents. The disease resembled leprosy, and the parents feared the stigma. The orphanage was later closed, and the boys abandoned to the streets. The brother died. Years on, our friend lives in a concrete room, a building from which he's threatened with eviction. To use a toilet, he must travel twice a week to Chad. In his humble dwelling, he has provided a home for many street children, and through the support of a Christian secondary school, King's, these children have been educated. 3 that we have met are now graduates. He campaigns for the rights of differently abled people in Tamil Nadu, and he knows we'll be sharing his story. CMC silently supports people in great need. While Geoff was at Chad, I served as chaplain in the main hospital. Services were in many languages. People frequently called on chaplains for prayer and counselling. Not only Christians, but Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and others. Sickness and death, it seemed, could be challenged by prayer, perhaps warded off. Their faith and searching questions touched me. In the hospital grounds was a small altar where people could light a candle. Again, people of all faiths used the facilities. The work was demanding and very painful at times. Finance for some treatments, such as bone marrow transplantation, could be beyond a patient's resources, even with huge help from the hospital. A 6-year-old girl with leukemia, the life and soul of the haematology ward, was given a 70% chance of survival. The family had sold all their possessions to fund staying in Vellore with their 2-year-old twins in order to attend CMC and also contribute, even marginally, to the cost of the child's treatment. The father's family with whom they lived urged the mother to let the sick child die and devote the remaining resources to rearing the twins. It was a desperate decision for the family to leave the hospital, but also for the hospital staff. The parents were given antiseptic hand gel and other supplies to nurse the child at home. 48 hours later, we received the tragic news that the mother had set fire to herself with the hand gel, leaving all 3 children bereft. The sense of desperation never left me. All the staff were affected. It has always been the aim of CMC that they never turn anyone away in need of medical assistance. However, the scale of need in India is huge, and the cost of providing good health care increases. Tens of millions of pounds in subsidy is given by the hospital each year. And today we rejoice in the person-to-person scheme, which enables supporters to financially contribute to the cost of specific patients' care. Chaplaincy frequently enmeshed me in the patient's wider family. Acts of affection sometimes led them to return to the hospital weeks later. One woman in her late 40s, the wife of a Muslim lawyer with cancer, searched me out and in the heavy rain of monsoon bent and kissed my feet. This is India. Emotions run deep. Generosity, trust, and gratitude are openly expressed. Living in Vellore for several months took us into the heart of the community. One day, we met a lecturer, Deborah, from DKM College, one of the first colleges for women in Vellore. After a discussion about diabetes, she suggested the college arranged a symposium with Geoff as a guest speaker. I was invited to open an exhibition in a marquee with displays of food and samples of suitable meals for people with diabetes. My job was to cut the ribbon. Simple, I thought. On the day, bunting decorated the grounds, and a beautiful crystal floor design depicted education in diabetes spreading out from the college in Vellore to all parts of the world. Suddenly taken aback by cameras and the presence of a media team, we discovered that we were a television news item and became the subjects of an article and photo in a state newspaper. Immediately after the opening ceremony, I was informed that several hundred students were waiting to hear me address them in the hall. To say the least, I was a little thrown, but set off in the direction pointed. God help me, please, I prayed. Then heard the words, "The truth will set you free." 5 minutes later, I began. I'm a foreigner. I'm old, and I have few secrets. Very few of you may have seen a foreigner. So what would you most like to ask me? This is your chance. There was a moment of silence. And then a brave young student sheepishly asked, "Mom, with respect, did you have a love marriage?" Quickly others followed suit, less cautious now. "Would you allow your daughter to have a love marriage? Is it not risky?" Much toing and froing of questions followed, and I learned of the trust that many placed in their parents' choice of marriage partners. From earliest years, Their parents had been seeking out a suitable boy from a family whose way of life, beliefs, culture, and religion harmonized with their own. Most often, a girl had the option to back out if the boy was not pleasing to her. Clearly, they thought romantic marriages left too much to chance, and felt there was perhaps a sense of irresponsibility about Western marriages. I did detect the odd romantic, however. The hour we shared passed amazingly quickly, and perhaps all our views were changed a little. Here are a couple of pictures of a Hindu wedding. It's 4 a.m. and it takes place in a dark temple. Because it's an auspicious time, it's not the only wedding taking place. Note the coconut, a symbol of prosperity, fertility, and good health. Huge numbers are invited because, historically, in the absence of a written register, the people are witness to the marriage. This photo is literally of tying the knot. In South India, amongst certain groups, one may have little sense of privacy, either about personal space, where one sleeps, washes, or about one's personal life, income, family, relationships. Amazed at our dress and colour of skin, curiosity overrode any reserve. Levine, a young friend, once said, "Auntie, do all foreigners have this pink here? With respect, can I touch?" At which she gently pinched both my cheeks and my nose. She was intrigued by my bag too. "What do you carry in it, Auntie?" Well, usually a Bible, antiseptic hand gel, loo paper, and diary, not normally things for display. I found it illuminating to live with such freedom and intimacy. Well, we visited her and Rajanfit, her husband, many times. Rajanfit was one of the first friends we made. We were climbing College Hill by the campus, and he danced with joy at meeting us, foreigners. He had no English, but communicated he'd become a Christian and pointed to his blind eye, the result of the hostile reaction of his brother. He took us to his home and introduced us to Lavinia, his wife, and her parents, and the 1-year-old child, Prince. In their basic home, the family slept on rush mats on the floor. 3 generations in a tiny room, with a bucket behind a screen to wash in. There was little furniture, other than a couple of plastic chairs, and the roof let in rain and wildlife. Over the years, we've traced the many ups and downs of this family. Death of parents. The birth of the second child, named after Geoff. Loss of both their jobs. The family divided through poverty. Vanya working in Malaysia, struggling to finance the family in Vellore. And homelessness. and eventually Lavanya back home, a house, both with jobs and on their feet again. Today, they say, all we have is yours. Our children are your children. Our grandchildren will be your grandchildren. Our food and our water are yours. Whenever you come to India, you come to our home. Your family, they come to our house. The generosity of the poor is beyond belief. Our lives have been enriched to a level we can never express. No amount of sharing can convey to others what the people of Vellore mean to us. Our friends come from hospitals, churches, colleges, rag pickers' villages, slums, and refugee camps. People of all religions, but strangely few of none. In this series, we hope to introduce you to some of these inspiring people. The whole city of Vellore pays tribute to Ida Scudder, with a statue always garlanded. Born to a family of medical missionaries, she responded to a call from God to pioneer medical training for women. In the creation of a 2-bed unit where she would train women in obstetrics, the seed was sown for what would become the Christian Medical College in Vellore. The pace at which CMC Hospital moves forward today is breathtaking. In recent times, a new hospital campus has opened in Chittor, 25 miles away, and a vast new complex at Kanigapuram, a super speciality and trauma hospital with 1,500 beds, opened early to accept patients with COVID-19. Ida Scudder's call came through her deep-rooted faith in a compassionate God. This was at the heart of all she did and expressed itself through a healing ministry. Significantly, Ida emphasized this was not just the building of a hospital and college, but rather the building of the kingdom of God. Ida Scudder's favourite hymn was "Be Thou My Vision." Be Thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Naught be all else to me, save that Thou art. Thou, my best thought by day or by night, waking or sleeping, Thy presence, my light.